Okay, so I think we could get started. Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is our second town hall, and we are the New York State Police Reform. We're the Saugerties Police Reform and Reinvention Committee. Our purpose is pursuant, as you may recall, to the governor's executive order, and we are charged with looking at our policies and procedures in the Saugerties Police Department and hoping to foster trust, fairness, and legitimacy in communities throughout our state, and to address any racial bias and disproportionate policing of communities of colors. So that's what we are charged with doing, and that's what we have embarked on since October, meeting weekly to come up with our recommendations. I am the chair of the committee. My name is Gilda Riccardi, and I just want to identify for those of you who are here for the first time, the other members on the committee. Christine Dinsmore, Tamika Dunkley, Robbie Rosari, Gina Kinnery, Annette Mulianti, Farzan Nadim, Joseph Puma, Bob Toman, Chief Joe Sinagra, Lauren Swan, Michael Catalinato, and Lanny Walter. And all of the members of the committee are here tonight. And we are here for this second meeting to give you, the public, an outline of our recommendations, a preliminary draft of our recommendations after the study that we have been conducting over the last few months, looking at our policies and procedures. So I will start. Oh, if you have questions, comments, concerns, ideas, anything, we want your input. So please use the chat feature. That will help us to be organized as we're going through the process this evening. There are a lot of you on the call, and we would like to hear from all of those who wish to be heard, but it's going to go through the chat feature. We ask that you not shout out or call out or do anything else. Ask your questions through chat, and everything will be screened and dealt with in that process. Okay. All right. So the first area that we looked at was our data analysis. And as we discussed in the last public meeting that we had, we looked at a couple of studies. We, the group, the committee, and some of the studies were on a national level out of the Stanford University in California. Another couple of studies were more local, and a big one was out of Suffolk County, New York, which was a 6-hour. And some of the data that came out of these studies really were concerning, because they really did point to a disparate policing, particularly with stops and searches, and that the African American, the Black community, and the brown community, the Hispanic community, were mostly more targeted than not. So we looked at studies, we looked at the data that came out of the studies, and then we looked at what we have here in our community, which we're happy to say we're looking very good in our community. Part of in our community policing, and that we are not seeing a disparate policing in our community. We're also, though, concerned that we don't have enough data to actually analyze this on a serious and deep level going forward. And that is something that we will be recommending to the town board for adoption. We want to expand the data collected in every stop, every arrest, every interaction with the police to include race, gender, age, and nationality. And these studies that we have reviewed all have the same recommendation, that there's not enough data collected, that we need more data collected, we need more data analyzed. Some of the problems that go along with the data collection and the analyzing is that you need really strong experts in this field to know what to ask, how to record it, how to analyze it, and then how to understand it, how to make that clear to the community what the numbers mean. So our recommendation to the town board will be that the state should do this on a statewide level and cover all of our municipalities, our cities, our towns, our villages, our communities, because they would have the power to put an analyst in there who could really look at all of our New York State data and then kick back to us, our community, how we are faring, how it's looking. Are we concerned about disparate policing in our community based on the data that the state is collecting, recording, analyzing, interpreting, and getting back to us? So I don't know if that's going to be feasible. We don't know, but that's our suggestion. If it's not something that the state can take on, we have to look at how we in our community are able to do that. Or if it's something that could be done more effectively and efficiently by the county, we could look to Suffolk County and Nassau County, who have been doing this kind of collection for quite some time now, for guidance on how they've done it. So the other aspect is construct sensitive and respectful data questions. So when the police officer is recording the data, how is he going to get that data from the individual that he's just stopped without it being insulting, or how to do that, how to do it well? And that's another thing. We can turn to our neighbors in the South, Nassau and Suffolk County. How are you doing it? How has it been working? And we could get guidance there, and obviously look on a national level too. Our recommendation will also be that there be annual review and reporting of this data. We want everything to be transparent. We are requesting that this data be placed on our police website, and all of it, the analysis and the collection, and we want it to be out there for the public to see at all times. So those are our recommendations on data. I don't know if any questions have come in. And this data, it carries through to all of the areas, whether it's a police stop or whether it's dealing with mental health issues or so the data collection piece really is for pretty much all of the things that the police are doing when they're interacting with the public.
Yeah, I just want to interrupt for 1 second. There's some latecomers, and I want to remind folks that all the questions and comments should go in the chat, and we have Rob on our committee who will be monitoring that. Okay, thank you.
We have a few questions here. We've got several in the chat. We have one from email that I think fits into this section as well. I'll read off the email question first. It's kind of a multi-parter, but it revolves around policies and procedures for Saugerties police body cams. The first question related to that is, how is the data stored? Is it local or is it in the cloud, etc.?
I guess I'd be the most appropriate person to answer that.
Yes, if you would, Chief, thank you. Defer to you.
Okay, so we have a 42 terabyte server. We keep all of our body camera footage here at our building. We do have a backup for that. We do not send it to the cloud simply because of the cost that would be associated with that. We would not be able to afford the program. And so it was economically best for our community that we kept it here on our server.
Chief, the next part of the next question related to Saugerties police body cams is, who has access either within the department or elsewhere?
Okay, so it's kind of a multifaceted question. Every police officer in the agency has access. When they download their camera, they have to tag each one of their videos. So in other words, they're going to classify it, what type of arrest it was. They'll put notes. There's a portion that provides an opportunity for the officer to put some notes in there. However, they cannot alter the video. So they cannot erase videos. They cannot redact videos. They can only add information to the video in the notes portion and also tag it. There's only one person in the department right now that has the ability to completely eliminate a video from the server, and that would be myself. And the only other time that there's access by an outside agency that could possibly do that is Safety Vision. And we use prima facie cameras. And if we have, sometimes we'll get video that's called corrupted. We go to open it, and the file won't open. So I have to call Safety Vision. We allow their IT department to access through a log me in into the system. They make the repairs, and then once they log out, the connection is disconnected and they can't get back in. So does that answer the question, hopefully, there for whoever requested? If not, just additional questions can be asked through the chat room.
Sure. Next part of the question, what type of logging is there with regards to access, for example, electronic or paper logs?
So my understanding from our company, Prima Facie Safety Vision, is that it's digitally recorded through keystrokes. They can go into the system and tell us who went in. Again, the officers don't go into the system, so there's no accountability there as far as us looking to see if they did anything other than when they download their video. However, if I go into the system, I have to log in with a password, which is unique to myself. So they're going to know that I'm the one that went in there.
Okay, great. And the last part of that question is, what's the process for going about a request for information? How long to process, cost, that sort of thing?
So body camera videos under LGS 1 falls under the FOIL. So anybody can FOIL a body camera video. The records officer in our department, which is Captain Steve Filak, he would provide that document or those videos to whoever made that request. However, the caveat is that there may be some redaction to videos that we have to do, just simply because, and each time if we get a request like this, in which to date, I have to be honest with you, since 2014, other than body video camera that goes to Discovery, we've had no public request for body camera video. However, we would meet with our attorney, town attorney, on the redaction. If your neighbor requests body camera video of an incident that occurred inside another neighbor's home, I don't think that would be appropriate. And there are some case law that has recently, I say recently within the last 5 years in New York State, that has really spoken directly to body cam video, the release of it, and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate to be released.
Thank you, Chief.
Before we continue, Rob, 1 second. Farzan, could you remove the screenshots while we have questions coming? If you could, thank you. Great, thanks.
And also someone asked for the legal aid, the public defender to be identified. So that's Michael, just, right? So I think the name, Michael, you want to say hello?
Yeah, Michael, give a little bit about your place.
Yeah, I'm Mike Catalanato. I'm the Assistant Public Defender for the Town of Saugerties and Village of Saugerties Courts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a few questions here. Some of them may be related to the slide, some may not. But I'll start from the top here. From Luisa Fuentes, how have you ensured non-English speaking community members have been able to be engaged in this process? And as Christine pointed out in the chat, we had a Spanish version of the survey that was distributed, it was made available. And the next question we have here, sorry, is also from Luisa. Have the meetings or meeting minutes been translated into Spanish and shared widely?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Rob?
Oh, I'm sorry. Have the meetings or meeting minutes been translated into Spanish and shared widely?
I don't believe they have. No, they have not.
Okay, the next question we have, do we have anyone on the committee who represents LGBTQAI? And we do.
And I answered yes, me, Christine Dinsmore.
Thank you. Let's see. And I'll remind just a reminder to everyone that we do not have, this is not an investigatory committee. So we will not be tackling those types of questions here. Those are more appropriate to be pointed toward the chief, to be directed toward the chief outside of this forum. Let's see, the next thing we have, and I think Luisa, I think we'll defer your next question around training because we do have a slide that talks about training. So if that's okay, we'll defer that one until after that, that section. Let's see. Okay, and then we have a question here from Michael Goldman. How can you say it's looking good if there is insufficient data? The studies you just mentioned show the opposite, as does the history of policing. It developed from slave catching. The history of the United States is that of a white supremacist society. What makes you believe that these powerful historical influences wouldn't apply to the Saugerties police?
Now, you know, I understand the intent of that question, and as a committee, we were committed to looking at our data, looking at our number of arrests, looking at the breakdown of our Hispanic, non-Hispanic, identified as other, Black, African American, white Caucasian arrests, and relating it to our population. And obviously there was nothing glaring in the numbers that presented. What we recommended, however, was that it was insufficient to continue this way, that we need to get more data on every.
You're muted. You're
They got
muted.
somehow.
You're muted.
I did. How did that happen? Okay, so I hope that clarifies what we have and what is posted on the Saugerties site and the percentages and the arrests. We do want more information, but looking at the numbers that we see here, they were not definitive or alarming to us at this juncture. But we want it to be better. We want more data, and I certainly, agree with the remainder of the comment on the history in this country of disparity.
Thank you. The next question, from Mercedes Ortiz, how are you going to ensure Spanish-speaking residents will receive minutes in the language they speak?
Well, we can certainly do that. I have to say we have reached out to our community as best we can with our flyers that are in Spanish, encouraging the Spanish-speaking community to complete our anonymous survey, and also sent out our information, and our website is also our Facebook page also has information that is bilingual. I don't believe, actually, as of the last meeting, that we had any responses on our Spanish survey, and I'm looking to Farzan to see if anything has come in.
No, we still don't.
No, so we can certainly translate and have posted and distribute, but where do we put that information? Who does it go out to? In our outreach, we have not had any input from that community.
I would just like to add that certainly we're open for anyone to help us reach the Spanish community, but I personally am understanding if they're reluctant to, in the environment that we've had recently where immigrants were really under attack, and hopefully that's changing. And if someone could help us reach out and realize that we're not about the immigrants and ICE and all of that, that would be really helpful.
Next question we have from Deidre Miller, who decides if someone has been racially profiled because there are nuances in our society that have been culturally conditioned.
You want me to take a stab at that one?
Yes, please.
So the first step in that process would be we'd have to receive a complaint that somebody believed that they were either racially profiled or that someone else was racially profiled. That would cause us to open up an internal affairs investigation. We would look into the complaint, whether it came in anonymously or whether it came in signed, by an individual. A lot of times when people file personnel complaints, they don't want to identify who they are because they're afraid of that police may retaliate against them, which they should not be afraid of, but I understand it. And we would look into it. And, when we have complainants that are willing to cooperate and work with us, we have better resolution, because then, we can look at a particular situation, a particular incident, and we gather additional information. It's difficult sometimes if something comes in anonymous and they just say, I heard, so-and-so was racially profiled. Those are difficult investigations for us to follow through on. We make our best attempts that we can. And I'm happy to say that we've had no cases here where we received such reports or had such findings.
Thank you, Chief.
Yep.
All right. Another question from Deidre Miller. How many people of color are on the committee looking at this data? So we have several. I'll let them speak for themselves. I'm one of them. My background, my parents are first generation from Puerto Rico. I was born and raised in New York City. I've been living here for about 15 years. My wife is Black. We have two biracial children. I'll pass it on to the next person on the committee who would like to speak on it.
I'm Manette Saninde, Mulianti Saninde. I'm an immigrant. I immigrated here from Eastern Africa. I've been here over 30 years. I'm a naturalized American, and my children are first-generation Americans.
I'm Gilda Riccardi. I'm also Puerto Rican descent. My mother was born and raised in Puerto Rico, and all my family is there.
Tamika Dunkley. I am Black, and I've been in Saugerties for about 12 years. All of my children go to school here, and I'm very involved in race relation issues countywide.
Thank you. Okay, let's see.
Should we go to the next group of slides, Rob, do you think?
Yeah, I think so, and we'll pick up on questions.
Sure, and then you can weave in the questions as we go along. I don't want anyone to miss out on that.
Absolutely.
Let's go to Christine Dinsmore, who's going to give us a report out on mental health and substance abuse.
How many meetings are? Unmute. Hi, I'm Christine Dinsmore. I really appreciate all of you being here tonight. I want to first, before talking about mental health and substance abuse specifically, the governor's directive is for us to address racial bias and over-policing in communities of color. And I want to express explicitly that mental health and substance abuse does not discriminate. And so in some ways, that might not look like we're addressing racial bias and over-policing. However, from my estimation, and I think the committee agrees, that every time you don't have a police officer responding to something that a mental health person or another an agency should be responding to, lessens the chance that we have a tragedy. So it might not be directly about over-policing communities of color and racial bias, but it certainly will make our community safer. So with that said, mental health, substance abuse, this is one area that seems to be overwhelmingly agreed upon by not only the community based on the survey and people we've spoken with, but also the police officers themselves. They're not wanting to be the psychologist of last resort. And so it's really good that we're all on the same page. So our first recommendation is we would like to expand the mobile mental health team to 24 hours, 7 days a week. Currently, it's from 10 a.m. in the morning to 10 p.m. at night. Based on the statistics from the Saugerties police, 19% of mental health calls are between the hours of 11 and 7. 54% are between 3 and 7. So I'm assuming that some of that 54% may be from 10 to 11, and 27% are from 7 to 3. So I'm assuming some percentage of that is between 7 and 10 in the morning. So I would say it's certainly a good guess to say that it's at least 20%, maybe more, of mental health calls coming when there's no backup, there's no resource. So we're looking for a 24/7 mental health team. However, the town board can agree with that, but that's an Ulster County issue. So why are we recommending it? We're recommending it because A, we're hoping other towns will recommend it also so that they will see the need. And also we're hoping that since it's so widely agreed upon, that once we submit our presentation, we really hope that the residents of Saugerties reach out to the Ulster County Executive Office and say, we have a need here. Please, it has to be 24/7. That mental health issues do not stop at 10 o'clock at night. So that's number one. Number two, we're hoping that we can establish, again, in Ulster County, a stabilization center. Dutchess County has a stabilization center, and let me explain what that is. A stabilization center is 24/7, a place that someone can either call, text, or walk in, and there they will have a professional person, a mental health professional who will listen to them, make an assessment, hopefully make a plan, and make a referral. This can really prevent things from escalating. If a family is in crisis, that they can reach out to a stabilization center rather than calling 911. It also helps if, in fact, someone is brought to the emergency room because of a mental health issue, but the psychiatrist there thinks it's not serious enough for a hospitalization, but the individual or the family knows it's too serious to go home, that they can go to a stabilization center with professionals, and it's kind of a pause until things are fine and they're ready to go back home. Okay, so we're, again, making a recommendation that Ulster County look to Dutchess County for some guidance about how we could do that here. Because again, that will be a situation that we will not have police addressing mental health issues that ultimately escalates to a criminal situation and maybe even a tragedy. The next recommendation is a co-respondent team of police and mental health workers. This could either be countywide or it could be specific to our town. How would that look? Well, in Colorado, it looks with a situation that every shift, based on funding from the Department of Human Services, every shift has a mental health person with a trained police officer who then can respond to issues that develop through the course of the day. That's pretty expensive. So the alternative, of course, could be that you have someone on call, a mental health person on call, that if in fact the police needs to team up with someone, they will know who the person is, they'll have a relationship with them, and they'll go out as a team, sharing their expertise to de-escalate. I just want to a little bit, there's a place that, again, about expense. In Eugene, Oregon, there's a place called Cahoots. And my estimation is, I'm assuming it's probably similar to how Family started. It started 40 years ago by a bunch of hippies, similar to Family of Woodstock, who didn't trust the system. And they dealt with crises in the community. And obviously, we know Family is all over the place. It evolved into a mainstream situation similar to Cahoots. And Cahoots does a situation where they go out and they go to all mental health calls unarmed, without police. They have had 25,000 calls and they've only had to call backup 150 times. So it's also a possibility. We could think about how we could work with Family, perhaps, to do something here. We're asking that the town be creative in helping our police be able to effectively deal with mental health. We also are looking for training. Joe Puma will talk about training, but the only thing that I would like to just briefly touch on of the need for police to be able to recognize mental health issues, including things like autism and PTSD, because the situation is that they need to recognize it and then adjust according to the diagnosis. And the situation is that I'm sure all of you, time and time again, I always hear when there's a shooting that the police will often say, if only they complied, if only they complied. However, there are certain situations such as autism spectrum, ADHD, even PTSD, where asking someone to comply is almost impossible. And so the police are trained to deal with being in control, but they have to get the skills to recognize if in fact controlling is actually escalating. Joe Puma will talk more about training. The final thing is about mental health, post-traumatic stress disorder, and suicide screening for police officers. Again, people will say, what's this have to do with racial bias and over-policing? The situation is, last time we were here, I didn't go over statistics again this time, but I do want to go over these statistics one more time. In the police force, 1 out of 7 police officers suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder. They see almost daily what some of us won't see in a lifetime: accidents, drownings, murders. I mean, they see really tough stuff, okay? Also, nationally, 26% of police officers are engaged in hazardous drinking. 16, again, this is all national, 69% have an increased risk of suicide, and 12% have a mental health diagnosis, and 26% have a current mental health diagnosis, but don't seek treatment because of fears of confidentiality. And also, it's kind of like manning up. You don't admit to problems. The issue of why is that something we're recommending? We're recommending it because when untreated mental health or untreated PTSD or untreated alcoholism meets a crisis, a disaster will almost certainly happen. And so we're wanting to prevent disasters, but on the other hand, we're also wanting to care for our police officers who should be having a healthy life. They should be enjoying their families. They should be able to not be suicidal. They should have services. If they're going to be out there for us, we should be able to provide the services, confidential services, to make sure. Okay. That's my presentation, and I'm open for questions.
Gilda, so we've got a number of questions here. I'm not sure that they fit into a very neat, specific section just at this point.
Okay,
With presentations right now, and
yes, why don't we continue with presentations and then deal with the questions at the end, unless it's a specific question to a specific presenter on that topic. How about that?
that
Okay.
sounds fair.
Good, thank you. So the next one, we will have a presentation by Farzan on domestic violence.
Thank you. Let me share the screen again. So I'm discussing the topic of domestic violence, which is one of the more important topics that we've looked at, because just in New York State, about a third of both women and men are subject in their lifetime to domestic violence by an intimate partner. And unlike mental health crises or addiction, domestic violence is actually considered a crime. And while it may be the result of mental illness, alcohol, or drugs, it does require police involvement because the state considers it a crime. The response to domestic violence by police is considered one of the most dangerous things that police officers could do. And because of that, domestic violence really requires thinking about alternative police strategies and proactive community prevention interventions. In addition, domestic violence often goes underreported. And part of that is because people who have had experience with domestic violence often don't follow through with criminal prosecution. And part of that is due to fear of reprisal or violence escalating. But many survivors of domestic violence also report that dealing with police and courts itself can be re-traumatizing. Now, in New York, police are required to make an arrest if they have probable cause to believe that the family offense is a misdemeanor or felony that has been committed. But they're not required to make an arrest if it's deemed to be a criminal violation, such as harassment or disorderly conduct, but they still should advise the victim that they have the right to press charges or go to family court. In Saugerties, the police department has experienced more than a 200% increase in domestic violence calls between 2011 and 2015, and has been proactive in responding to this crime, including the use of lethality assessment tools to determine if the victim is in danger, of repeated abuse, and also involving various community education programs. Last year being 2019, which I'm talking about. In 2019, there were 261 domestic violence calls that the Saugerties Police Department addressed. And in fact, that was a 14% drop from the previous year, and it was the first decrease in domestic violence calls in 6 years. Now, another aspect of this is that nationally, about 40% of law enforcement families experience domestic violence, and that contrasts to only about 10% of non-law enforcement families. There have been methods that have been developed. The U.S. Department of Justice Committee on Violence Against Women and the International Association of Police Chiefs has developed a model of dealing with police officers who commit domestic violence, and this includes prevention, training, finding the early warning signs and intervention, going through victim safety and protection, and post-incident administrative and criminal decisions. But while there's a model, having a model is actually a good beginning, the problem still requires adequate data to figure out the extent that this is happening. Without data, we cannot understand anything. So what are our recommendations? What are we thinking of as this committee? There are 3 aspects we're looking at. One is robust and detailed domestic violence data collection, the second training, and the third prevention and intervention programs for officer-involved domestic violence. In the short term, we think that without robust data, the extent of domestic violence in Saugerties, the demographics of the perpetrators, the victims, the magnitude of officer-involved domestic violence, all these important factors cannot be determined. We need to establish a domestic violence data file. That's what we're recommending. That includes domestic violence calls, how many resulted in court involvement, the demographics of the perpetrator and the victim, paired with the ultimate police action. Was it felony, misdemeanor, warning, whatever, and any relationship of the perpetrator or the victim to the responding police officer. Also, in short term, we recommend providing training on domestic violence, PTSD, and trauma-informed policing, etc. In the longer term, we suggest that we identify grants to establish prevention and intervention for officer-involved domestic violence. And with that, I'm going to finish and take questions.
Okay. Thank you, Farzan. We have a few questions related to the subject, and apologies in advance. I'll try to capture all of them as best I can, but the tools are a little limiting in terms of marking off things as they get addressed. So let's see here. Just want to make sure I'm not missing any of the earlier comments that relate. All right. Go. All right, so we have one question here from Luisa Fuentes. What happens when a Leo is the abuser? How will those be handled, and what support will spouses receive? As a former prosecutor, actually, it is the system that many of them are afraid of.
You know, again, I'm probably the most appropriate person to answer that for our department. Anytime, if we have a police officer who's involved in a domestic incident, if they live here in Saugerties and we respond to it, we handle it just like every other domestic incident. for officers that live outside of Saugerties. Whenever police agency responds to it, they would handle it just like any other domestic incident. However, they would make notification to myself advising me that I had an officer that was involved in such an incident.
Thank you, Chief.
Rob, should we move on to other topics while you're looking
Yeah,
for?
let's do that. Yeah,
And then we could wrap up all the questions at the end. How about that?
I think so. There's a lot of cross chatter that's making a little
Yeah,
difficult.
yeah.
A lot of questions from-
Yeah, right, if the comments could, if the chat could just be very specific to questions coming to the committee and to the speaker, that would be really helpful.
Can I also make a suggestion? A suggestion, when you put a question in, why don't you put a topic like domestic violence or mental health or whatever first, and then do your question, and that would be easier to flag.
Right. And if there is a lot of communication between the public who are here with us tonight, we could take a lot of that onto the Facebook page and start to, different group chat discussions there. So we could get through the identifying all of the issues. And just so you know that these topics came up based on the surveys that came in. And we had how many responses total to date, Farzan?
I think we have slightly over 300.
Yeah, so we had a lot of input from the Saugerties community, and we gleaned the different areas of. So that's where this came from. Plus, our group when we first started to meet, areas of interest that we noticed needed more attention. Okay, so now we're going to go to Bob, who's going to talk about the school resource officer position.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank Christine Dinsmore, who did a lot of the research and background on this and created the slide. There's a real dichotomy. We had picked up from our survey, previous town hall meetings, and direct contact with members of the committee that there was concern about the role of the school resource officer. Nationally, there's research on what's called the school to prison pipeline, where young Black men are often arrested in school settings with police involvement of an officer in the school, and tend to drop out or go into the system, become incarcerated and so forth. So families of color have concern about that. Yet we also have an award-winning SRO that can serve as an example to many of the other police departments in Ulster County and throughout New York State, if not throughout the country. What we had suggested, and I had talked to the superintendent of the school district, I'm also on the school board, and to the high school principal, Mr. Tim Reed, developing a video so that members of the community could see what the role of the school resource officer is, having students who've interacted with the school resource officer comment on that and really get the word out. A lot of what the school resource officer does is preventative in nature, and it's hard to justify that. People see oftentimes the school resource officer as a disciplinarian, and just like there's bad press for police officers for things like George Floyd that our department gets a broad brush with. There was an incident today where a young girl in Florida got restrained by an SRO and was knocked unconscious in breaking up a fight. We believe that the school resource officer in Saugerties serves as a resource to the school and to the community and to the students. He's not there as a disciplinarian. He's not there to make arrests, but he's really there to help. And this confusion over roles of what the school resource does creates distrust in the community. So one of the main things that we want to do is inform the public through and in partnership with the school. There's also, I would fault the school district. There are such things as poor administrators, not necessarily in Saugerties, but who would demand that a school officer arrest a student when they're having struggles disciplining that student. And that's the fault of school administrations. Again, when I saw that incident in Florida today, I cringed. That officer shouldn't have been anywhere near enforcing discipline or acting as security for that school. The school has security to deal with that. They have a code of conduct. And again, both the school and the police department need to educate the community on what the school resource officer does. We'd also like to see, as part of that education process, data on what the school officer does. There's a call for, how many arrests does the school resource officer make? Unbeknownst to the community, the school resource officer in Saugerties is mentoring 14 students who are in danger of dropping out of school, and has shown success with 13 of those students at keeping them remaining in school. So a lot of what the resource officer does is preventative in nature. We like to get that data out, as well as any type of interactions. And certainly the officer does provide some safety. One of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that children need to feel safe in their environment if they're going to learn, and that is there. Along with that, we would like to see the training that the school resource officer receives have implicit bias training along the autism spectrum, ADHD, other special needs areas, and so forth. But I think with that, if we're going to expect out of our SRO, our school district personnel need the same training so they can be on the same page. As Ms. Dinsmore referred to in her report, it might be different about how you interact to an individual on the autism spectrum who's experiencing difficulty and showing a lack of ability to comply versus someone who is in full faculty and maybe is just resisting for resistance sake. So that really concludes what I've had to say tonight. One more thing, I think in the school district, you might hear the term restorative justice. We have a new school administration, a new superintendent, and a new high school principal, Mr. Reed. Part of the reason they were hired is because they were committed and familiar with principles of restorative justice. So that's one thing that we would also see coming into the school district that could help the SRO be a true resource to the school. So I'm open to questions, and if not, we'll move on.
Bob, should I move on, or is there a specific SRO question that you can identify?
Sorry, I have a couple of SRO specific questions here.
Okay.
How many students has this SRO had to restrain from 2018 to 2019? That's one question.
Chief, do you have that data handy?
Yeah, there were no restraints that were conducted. It's a 2018, 19 or 2019, 2020.
This says specifically 2018 to 2019.
There's no restraints that were conducted by the SRO.
Let's see, the next one we have. What data do we have that SROs make students feel safe?
Well, I think the data you have, and Chief, you can speak to that. If you look at, we haven't had some of the violent incidents that other schools have had. You're looking at how do you measure prevention? And the way you measure prevention is if you don't have incidents that would be threatening to the safety of students or staff.
And I kind of paused because I got a smile on my face, because out of all of my officers, I get praises constantly over our school resource officer. I get it from students. I get it from parents. I have not, since Travis Winchell, our current school resource officer, has been assigned over to the middle and high school, I have not received one complaint from a parent about his conduct or any complaints from students. So I think when we take a look at that, that's a really good data set. And just to have those community comments about the job that he's doing, and they even hear from the school board about the job that he's doing, I think that speaks tremendously towards his capabilities, and it's a positive experience for both students and faculty and parents.
And also, the Officer Winch was highly rated in the survey that our group put out. He received several positive comments.
Okay, Rob, I'm going to move on, or is there something?
No, I think we should move on. There are other comments around SROs, but again, they border their opinion rather than questions, or state rather than questions. So I'm going to refrain from those.
Okay, thank you.
Something.
Okay,
I just want to say one more thing. The chat, I put this in the chat, but all the comments in the chat we're collecting. So that's okay. We're taking your feedback, even if we're not taking it directly here. just to say. So keep your feedback coming.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we're here tonight. Okay, our next presenter is going to be Annette, and Annette's going to tell us about accountability and our recommendations in that arena.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you taking time out. My name is Annette Muyanti. Last town hall, we went through the current existing accountability in Saugerties, in the police department specifically, and the different levels of accountability within the police department, within the town, the county, the state and federal accountability. Today, we're going to look at specific areas of accountability and the recommendations that we are putting forth to the Saugerties Town Board. The first one will be the recommendation that the town board appoint a committee to explore and create a civilian complaint review board in Saugerties. We looked at different towns, we looked at review boards nationally, how they're set up, their different setups, their different levels of accountability. And that we're going to leave to the Civilian Complaint Review Board when it's formed. The structure and the functions of that review board that we are proposing will be determined by the town appointed committee. So their job, of course, will be to both explore and create that review board. The next point would be the town halls, like the one we are having. We are recommending that these town halls continue on a regular basis. We have found that the civilians have a lot of questions, as we have seen, and there's a lot of information. Some of it may not be relevant or true, and so we have found that these town boards or these town forums serve a very, very significant role between the police and the civilians. It's a forum for us to get together, and so we are recommending that they continue on a regular basis after this committee has disbanded. And we're hoping that there'll be a liaison officer who will assist in coordinating these town halls. The officer is to come get a team together, and that liaison officer and the team will be approved by both the town board and the Saugerties residents. Furthermore, in the event of the formation of a permanent civilian review board, the CCRB that will be formed will then play a role in coordinating future town halls. Then we also have some recommendations concerning the right to know card. I don't know if you're familiar with this card, but the Ulster County Legislature will be voting on a right to know law. Poughkeepsie has one, other counties have one already in place. This police transparency law will require that police officers identify themselves, that they name the reason for each individual stop or encounter, that they provide information on the complaint process at the end of the encounters that do not result in an arrest or summons. This committee will go even further. We are recommending that the town board also enact the proposed right to know law here in Saugerties, and also to include that the Saugerties Police Department they will print the business card for all its officers with the following information: the name of the officer, Saugerties Police Department phone number, the name of the community liaison officer and the police chief's phone number, the police chief's email. This business card will be given out to civilians at every police encounter. Lastly, we are here to inform you of steps that are currently in place to ensure that police officers are not involved in any radical groups And currently, the Saugerties Police Department has policies and procedures already in place to make sure that none of their officers are involved in any radical white supremacy groups, any groups that share in beliefs that are similar to those, or any group that participates in domestic terrorism. Currently, the police manual and procedures, we have a department policy and procedure 330.00 that speaks specifically to police officer conduct on duty and off duty. The Saugerties Police Department also has a social media policy 3025.00 that speaks again directly to officer speech and contributions to their personal social media platforms. These media platforms, like most government agencies, are being monitored by the superior officers, and also the public is welcome to participate. You are welcome to, you see what's out there, most of us on social media platforms. Please feel free. If you see anything that is of concern, while we are convened as a committee, we will take those concerns, or you can contact Chief Sinagra directly. His email is on the police Facebook page, or you can call the police department and make these reports. But these laws and procedures are already in place, and disciplinary action against any police officer who violates these existing policies and procedures, of course, will depend on the degree to which their act has affected the agency and the public. Sanctions currently range from verbal counseling sessions, written counseling sessions, command discipline or suspension with filing of formal charges. Once charges are filed against any police officer, this matter is then, of course, forwarded to Albany. These officers are brought before the Public Employees Relations Board. Final disposition of these charges or any disciplinary measures or dismissal recommendations are at the hands of the administrative law judge. He gets the final say, and his decisions are binding. Of course, the police officers in Saugerties are unionized, and so they have the right, of course, to representation. Lastly, we have currently, since 2012, we have had 2 Saugerties police officers who have been found to be in violation of the existing moral integrity clauses. One was a full-time officer and he was dismissed. The other officer received command discipline and was suspended. So there has been enactment of the police procedures regarding this matter. So at that last point, I will end my presentation. And if there are any questions, I'll take them now.
Okay. Thank you, Annette. We have one question that came in on email that I'd like to read right now. It says, the question states, there's no doubt that this country is politically divided, and we can see this in Saugerties as well, especially when certain people fly Confederate flags on their homes and vehicles. Since January 6th, there's heightened concern among anti-racists about the connection between white supremacy groups and law enforcement. Do you think you need to minimize the chance that new hires or officers affiliate with such groups? If so, how would you do so?
Thank you for that question. I'm going to defer the question to Chief Sinagra.
Yeah, we have a very high standard for vetting police officer candidates here, which when you apply for a job here, there's an extensive background check that's done by our detective division. You also have to submit to a polygraph examination. You have to submit to a psychological examination and meet with our department psychiatrist, psychologist. You have to take a drug test. We interview your neighbors. We interview family members. You have to, in order to even be allowed to process, you have to provide the passwords to all your social media platforms. And our detectives look at that. And, you know, when we gather that plethora of information, it really helps us form an opinion. And based on the independent referrals that we get from our department psychiatrist, psychologist, the polygraph examination results, etc., we believe once we have all that information, we can pick a good candidate. But everybody has to understand human nature. We can't say for sure 100% of the time that an individual who made it through all this process is not affiliated with any of these organizations, just like I can't say that anybody that's on with us tonight is not affiliated with any of those organizations. So we rely heavily too on the public, and that's why we interview the neighbors. You know your neighbor. If they're a police officer, you know them probably better than most people, maybe even than the people they work with. You see what they're doing when they're away from work. And that's a telltale sign, and that's important. And that stuff like that should be brought to our attention. And there's other agencies, such as federal agencies, that are monitoring social media platforms and in an effort to weed out, locate anybody, whether it's a police officer or not, that may be involved in these type of groups. So I think we do a really good job here. I'm very disappointed when we have a candidate that fails our process and I find out they went elsewhere and got a law enforcement job. I don't think everybody in our county or in our state has such a stringent process for becoming a police officer. And that's one of the things that really needs to be looked at, that there be a statewide criteria and that everybody follows the same methodology for employment to make sure that we're properly vetting our officers.
Thank you, Chief.
Should I move on, Rob?
Yeah, let's continue.
Okay. Gina is now going to report out on community education and outreach.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to talk a little bit more specifically about the community police liaison that Annette talked about along with the community forums. We are recommending that either an officer or a resident of Saugerties be appointed the community police liaison. The liaison will be a communication bridge between the Saugerties Police Department and the Saugerties community. The liaison will facilitate ongoing sharing of information and dialogue, reducing situations of misinformation and at times missing information altogether, misunderstanding, and ultimately mistrust. The goal of this recommendation is to foster a communication climate that is open and transparent. The liaison will schedule regular, consistent forums inviting both the public and the SPD. The forums will be an opportunity for the public to share their concerns, ask their questions, and make suggestions. The police will be there not only to answer questions and address concerns, but they will have the opportunity to inform and educate the public about their policies and procedures, their trainings, their programs like the SRO and the ride-along program, the data, and the day-to-day police activities. The liaison will also have the latitude to change this format, maybe going from large group to small groups, maybe even having some focus groups. And we even talked about informal coffee and conversation groups. The liaison will also develop a communication plan, including how forum information will be disseminated to the community in a timely and efficient manner. In addition, the plan will outline specific follow-up procedures for any issues that cannot be resolved during the forum. The plan will be available in Spanish. The liaison's contact information will be made available to the public, and they will have direct access to the liaison. The liaison's contact information will also be on the right to know card, as Annette mentioned, and the officer's business cards for easy reference. The Saugerties Police Department will maintain existing partnerships with other community stakeholders. These stakeholders include, but are not limited to, individual citizens, as well as business, school, faith communities, and town leaders. These partnerships not only increase police visibility, but create opportunities for the police to interact with the community in non-law enforcement activities. For some members, the only interaction they have with the PD, and I just wanted to say we were given the statistic that 2% of any community's population has any direct interaction with the police department. But even with the limited amount of community members that have had contact with the police, they are usually for law enforcement type issues like you got a ticket, you had an accident, you were a victim of a crime, or maybe you were being arrested. And then there are, of course, the medical and mental health emergencies. But with only these types of interactions, sometimes negative police associations can develop. Not that the officers are negative or they did anything wrong, but the situations themselves can cause people to be angry. They can be negative, stressful, and traumatic. Community partnerships, seeing police officers in different activities, may help to reduce some of these negative associations. These partnerships also let the police see community members under a different set of circumstances, and this further can break down any barriers or misconception. The goal of these partnerships is to reinforce that community safety and community wellness is a shared responsibility. No longer can we view community safety as the sole responsibility of the police department. This is a shift in thinking. There's no longer them and us. We have to start thinking in terms of we, and this is being our community. The Saugerties Police Department will continue and expand their partnerships and collaborations with various agencies and organizations regarding their expertise and the specialized trainings they offer. These specialized trainings include, but are not limited to, diversity, culture, including language barrier, racial bias, LGBTQ, domestic violence, mental health, and special needs. And I know my committee mates are going to be talking about this more. The Saugerties Police Department's willingness to pursue this expertise and these specialized trainings demonstrate the Saugerties PD is committed to the goal that everyone will be treated fairly, justly, and with informed awareness and understanding by the Saugerties Police Department. The next one would be positive interactions with the police and the community will be tracked and recognized, especially during this time when the police profession and police character is being questioned and judged. We want to bring to the forefront positive examples and stories of our officers going above and beyond. Officers who go beyond their regular contract, doing things not because they have to or it's part of their job, but because they care. These will be examples of how officers on a daily basis make positive impacts and positive differences. We also want to make the community aware of all the continuing accomplishments of our Saugerties Police Department. This recognition initiative not only increases community confidence, but it can be a morale and motivation boost for our dedicated officers. We want our officers to know that they are appreciated and that their community supports them. Our officers have difficult jobs, and community appreciation and support can make all the difference.
Thank
Any
you, Gina.
questions? Yep.
Rob, any specific questions for Gina at this point?
We did have one from earlier on. I wanted to go back and just cover real quick here. What training will be provided to, this is from Luisa Fuentes, what training will be provided to the police to help them understand the history of policing in the US and how that history has impacted Black communities and other communities of color?
Yeah, like me to answer that one?
Yeah, and that might also come under training, but
Yeah.
anyway, go ahead, Chief.
So we're going to be educating our officers in a new curriculum that was released from DCGS just a week or so ago called Principal Policing, which is basically the old procedural justice that's been repackaged with a new component added to it that specifically addresses the history of law enforcement and why there's a view. Why there's a view.
Oh, you barely clip that?
Look at that. Why there's a perspective in by some police officers about a bias, and it's going to really bring to the forefront, in which I became an instructor in this, and I learned a lot becoming an instructor in it about our history and law enforcement, and it gave me a better understanding as to why we're viewed the way we are by some members of our community. So that's a start, and we're looking for, and all of a sudden it seems, since this is a hot topic, there's all kinds of programs that are coming out, but we have to vet any programs that we bring into the department to make sure that the training, number one, is evidence-based, and number two, that there's some sort of a rubrics that'll be used so that we can ascertain whether or not we're receiving the benefit from that program that we want to achieve here in Saugerties.
Thank you, Chief. Okay, Rob, shall I move on?
Now let's continue.
Okay. Next, we're going to have Joe talking about training. Joe Puma.
Good evening, Saugerties. I hope everybody's healthy.
Due to the recent unfortunate events with the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, policing in America has been under extreme pressure to redefine their roles and become more aware of the needs of their community. Fortunately, in Saugerties, our police department has been performing at these levels, but have shown the willingness to implement changes to better serve the community. During our committee meetings, we've brought in people from the department. The chief himself has been involved in every meeting, and every question that every one of us has had has been answered by them. And what struck me, and I have, to be perfectly honest, 25 years in law enforcement, I'm retired 15 years now, the willingness of the officers to learn more. They want to make this police department better. And I think it comes down to better training, not only pre-police officer, but in service. The New York State Police Academy training should be changed from military-based approach to a more academy-based approach centered on a vision of police as guardians, not warriors. From the beginning of a police officer's career, there should be an emphasis on the responsibility to promote public safety and uphold the rule of law. The academy-based training needs to instill the importance of trust and accountability between law enforcement and the communities they are sworn to protect. Training must have an emphasis on both legal knowledge and implicit bias training. Law enforcement officers make difficult decisions in the field, which often require the application of illegal doctrines to the facts available in real time. Extensive and continuous legal training will minimize the instances which police make erroneous decisions, which will benefit police and citizens alike. And when feasible and advisable, officers explain events at those events unfold may help ease the tensions inherent in intrusive interactions. Now, while implicit bias training does not necessarily reduce all biases, it raises consciousness about implicit and subconscious bias. Research has suggested that by making one aware of the conscious biases, these malleable biases may be reduced. The Saugerties Police Department's ongoing training must include mental health, autism spectrum, ADHD, and disability awareness and effective interventions. As stated in the report, the police are increasingly called to incidents that are not necessarily law enforcement issues. Therefore, responding officers must have the understanding and the skills to respond appropriately and helpfully during personal or family crisis. Ongoing training should include domestic violence intervention and investigation. The department should have ongoing de-escalation training, which will reinforce training on mental health, substance abuse, and domestic violence. Chief Sinagra has already suggested reality-based scenario training, which would and should include people of color. Also, we have all seen the unfortunate traffic stop incident in the parking lot in Kingston. Saugerties Police Department already practices a concept when appropriately called tap out, which is appropriately called tap out, in which one officer steps in to take over from another officer when things seem to be escalating, a common sense approach. And also something the public should also know, and Christine mentioned it before, if you're told something by the officer, comply. Even though you know you're 100% correct, comply and fight at a later date. That would de-escalate the situation immediately. Now, these recommendations should be presented to the Office of Public Safety. The Office of Public Safety is where training is formed and established. It is time for the Office of Public Safety through the MPTC to change this training, reforming their policies based on our recommendations to reduce excessive use of force by restructuring their training to focus more on de-escalation tactics and implicit bias training. Once accomplished, we should send it to the governor for his approval. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer.
Thanks, Joe. I think we can continue and come back to questions a little bit later.
Sounds good. Okay, Lanny's going to give our last presentation on racial bias.
Unmuted. Good evening, everybody. Those of you who are still here. There's a lot of redundancy in what you've heard. And obviously training is a main theme, which I do not abandon. I want to make it clear that I am not inclined or at this point to accuse our local police of being racist or biased towards anybody. They actually have a policy called Unbiased Policing, number 4023, issued in June of 2017. Obviously, having a policy and having it in black and white and having the officers learn the policy does not necessarily solve the problem. In our society, as you probably all know, prejudice runs deep in some people. You may have heard of the doll test. The doll test was done in the 40s by Dr. Clark and his wife, and again in 2015. And basically what it reveals that children, and the ages are 2 to 7, and there is a video that documents this, 65 to 70% of them are shown white dolls or colored dolls. And the white dolls are smarter, friendlier, and prettier. And the colored dogs are stupider, meaner, and uglier. Of course, there's no reality to that, but it is a sense that these kids have and have developed at a very young age. So when we talk about bias, it's not a fiction, that it exists, and it may well exist in all of us and in the minds of the people we hire to serve as in our police department, both civilian and law enforcement. And of course, Saugerties is a pretty segregated community. The 2019 census had the Black population at 1.6%, the white population at 93%. Obviously, the more we interact with people who are not the same, the bias level diminishes. Even, I'm sure, the subconscious bias levels diminish. We wanted to know on this task force what training is done to connect people within the police department with their implicit and unconscious bias. And I asked for training records for 2019 to 2020, thinking there must be training going on the issue of implicit bias in the age of the Black Lives Matter movement. It would certainly, you would think, would have stimulated that kind of training. The department has a policy, and the policy says, this is a policy on unbiased policing. It says all employees will receive this is from 2017. All employees will receive basic and periodic in-service training, and where deemed necessary, remedial training on subjects related to police ethics, cultural diversity, police-citizen interaction, standards of conduct, conducting motor vehicle stops, implicit bias, and related topics suitable for preventing incidents of bias policing. Now that's great, and it's great that they have it. And I assumed that based on the fact that that policy exists, that there would be records of training and curriculum for those trainings, but it doesn't exist. There is no such training, at least in the 2 years that I reviewed. And when I asked the chief, who has been very forthcoming in all of this deliberations, how come that's what I'm finding? I mean, he quite frankly reported that racial bias is a term introduced to law enforcement in 2020. That's last year. There is no Department of Criminal Justice Services, which is the state agency that sort of oversees the law enforcement world in New York State. There is no Department of Criminal Justice approved curriculum that specifically addresses a single topic of racial bias or implicit bias. 3 days ago, this is June 14th, 2021, DCJS approved a curriculum called Principal Policing. This is the first time in Chief Sinagra's career that DCJS has approved a curriculum which specifically refers to implicit bias and addresses the issue. Now, it's great that that's happening, and we hope, we all should hope, that that training will become serious in our community and around our county and our state and our country. So recommendations that we've made is that there should be racial and subconscious bias awareness in all training. The chief, I believe, probably does learn on recruitment about people's biases to some extent, at least. They're not training non-employees, but I'm sure they explore that, and perhaps we'll explore it more deeply as the training progresses. We favor such training upon hire and for racial bias, implicit and subconscious bias, and continue it for every 2 years. It's not something that's a one-time shot, to fully try to appreciate and get in touch with your own prejudices as a police personnel. The most important thing is that this training needs to be evaluated. It needs to be studied by people who are capable of studying it. It needs to be determined what's effective, what isn't effective, the number of stops of people of color going up, going down, where are they? Have they gone down and now they're going back up? But this needs to be evaluated either by state agencies that have all qualifications to do that, or by our own consultant. But the goal here is to avoid the national media coming to Saugerties. It's not impossible that there's something terrible could happen here, as has happened in other not so different communities. Not all of these terrible events and George Floyd and whatnot have happened in large communities. We want to enhance the open-mindedness of our police personnel so that something as terrible as the George Floyd incident never happens here. Thank you.
Thank you, Lanny. Rob? Shall we start with, there was a lot of chat during Lanny's presentation, and I think some things have been clarified online, but if there are some members of the public who need further clarification on that point, we're happy to continue to explain it. But otherwise, we can move on to other comments, questions, issues that have come up through the chat.
Let me jump back to the top of the list here. We've got quite a few questions. Let's see. Covered that. There was a question earlier on, I think to Chief Sinagra regarding beyond the, who oversees the Saugerties police? Trying to just paraphrasing, but basically that's the question from earlier on.
So we report directly to the town board. I report directly to the town board. I also report to Mayor Bill Murphy. And then if anybody if they're asking that question in the context, if there was a, official misconduct out of this office or by police officers, complaints would get filed, and the public has a right to file a complaint directly with the town board. The complaint form is on our website. There's instructions on there how to file a complaint. If they want to file a complaint against me, obviously don't bring it here to the police department. That should go directly to the town board. And you can also go to the Ulster County District Attorney's Office, the New York State Attorney General's Office. You can go to the New York State Police. So there's a multiple, we're held accountable to a lot of different authorities, but primarily we answer directly to the town board.
Thank you, Chief. All right. Next question I should have here is, does the police department have a social worker liaison for persons experiencing mental health crises? I think we touched on that a bit, but you want to talk about that?
Are we talking police officers or community members?
Unclear, I think. The way I read it was for the police itself, for the police department itself.
Okay, so we do have a program here that we pay for our police officers, that if they should find that they're having difficulties, even personal situations at home, they can reach out to that organization, and that is confidential. And the only time I would be notified that an officer has done that is if an officer has intent to hurt themselves. Then by law, they have to notify me.
Thank you, Chief. Moving on, we have, has anybody thought this from Lisa Fuentes, anybody thought about reaching out to Master of Social Work programs? What about hiring LCSW onto the police department, who can then supervise Master of Social Work level students to provide assistance and extra support, not only for the community, but for the police officers?
I have the mental health part. I just want to say, I hadn't thought about that, and I'm writing that down because that's really a great idea. I don't know what the chief thinks, but that's a great idea. I'm taking notes. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm in favor of anybody coming into this department and assisting this agency so that we can better serve the community. The question that I have, and that all of us have to answer as taxpayers, is what can we afford to bring to our community? And how do we justify that cost? So there's a million things I would love to bring in here. I'd like to have our own response team, but we can't afford to do that. So I think when we take a look at things like those suggestions, that may have to be a county-wide type program that assists all the agencies, so everybody's getting a bigger bang for their buck.
Thank you. Another question. Where do these statistics come from? And Jill, I think this was from much earlier on during your presentation.
Sure.
Thank you.
What, I don't know which statistics specifically.
It was a general question. I mean, yeah, it doesn't specify a particular one.
I don't know if they meant about the study or if they meant about our particular statistics in Saugerties. So I'll give a little bit of that. All of this is on our website. It's on the Saugerties Police Department website. The number of arrests, the type of arrests, breakdowns, all of that is there under the data. What is not there, but we are proposing that it be there, are the arrests of the individuals and the breakdown of the racial breakdown. So if the individual is asking for that, in 2019, there were 327 males arrested, 64.88%. Females arrested 177, Hispanics 40, non-Hispanic 469, identified as other 3, Black African and African American 35, and white Caucasian 458. So when we looked at those statistics, we saw the breakdown. We compared that to the, let me see if I could find the, all of this is on the site, the population and the breakdown of race, which we spoke and addressed earlier today in our community. 93% are white, 1.6% Black African American alone, And then it goes further down into Asian alone, American Indian, 2 or more races, Hispanic, Latino was 7%, and white alone, not Hispanic, is 88.3%. So that's what we were looking at initially. But then, of course, but it's very clear to all of us, especially after reading the studies that came out of the national studies and the local ones, that we need more data to identify if there is disparity in policing and racial bias in police stops, in arrests, in dispositions, all of it. We want more information. And this is what we are seeing even in our neighboring communities. Our Kingston police report, Kingston committee report came out, came out, I think yesterday or today. And they're saying the same thing, more data collection, more data collection, more data collection. So we're hoping this is going to be something that's done on a statewide level. Of course, we'll do it on a local level, but statewide would be even better so that we have uniformity in how policing is. So it shouldn't be in one community, it's permitted, and in another community, there's no data to identify if it's even happening. So that's what we're doing. That's what we're recommending.
I'd like to also add.
Yes, please.
I'd also like to add, because that question popped up in the chat when I was giving statistics. I'm not sure if it was directed to my statistics, but every statistic we use will be documented in our final report. And if anyone has a question about specific statistics, you should email us and we'll provide it.
And if I can just interject and just add one thing here, we did release last week our 2020 year-end report, and there is a page that's devoted to those breakdowns. So this is something new. I took that away from our committee meetings, and that has been incorporated into the 2020 year-end report, which can be found, as I said, on our website. And we're going to have to get more additional data. So, but we do have a breakdown of the demographics of arrests now.
It's, what we're really going for here is we want transparency, and we want the public, we want our community to know what is happening, to question what is happening. We're all in this together. We want a good force, and we want citizens protected, and we want everyone treated equally. That's the main goal, and that's what we're here fighting for.
Correct.
Okay.
Will there be a handout available at this presentation?
Not necessarily a handout, but as Christine said, all of the data and all of our documents and our draft report is going to be prepared and available to everyone. And a lot of data is on our Saugerties Police Department website.
Well, also just to say that for those folks who sign up for the third and last town hall prior to coming here, our goal is that you will have in your hands our proposed final draft so you can read it before we're even together. So you come knowing that you want to just pinpoint something. So that'll be available.
Right. And, keep in mind, we've been working since October on this and our survey and analyzing, but we may be missing things. That's why we need your input. We want your input. You're important to us, that we hear you and see if there's other areas that we should be including in our report. This is our draft recommendation. It's not our final.
Thank you.
Gilda, related to that, there was just a question of what is going to happen with the recommendations we are making.
Our recommendations are according to, I don't have the, if you give me 1 second, I might find the exact wording, but as I recall from the governor's executive order, we prepare our final recommendations. They go to the town board. The town board by April 1st has to submit a certification of adopting recommendations. And that's the wording in the executive order. Well, that's the paraphrase of the wording in the executive order. There may be some issues that they want to finesse or discuss or have some other ideas on our recommendations, but it is the town board's obligation to accept our final as we work out what is going to be the best for our community and for our police department. So I'm not sure that that's definitive, and if for example the town board says we're adopting this, and this, but not that, I don't know how they can send a certification up to the governor that they've adopted our recommendations. So there may be some discussion to come up with a document that we can all live with. And I think that's probably the most likely scenario.
Next, this is under DB and accountability. Will any of the disciplinary actions taken by the PD against police officers who engage in intimate private partner violence against partners be disseminated to the community pursuant to the repeal of 50A?
You were kind of broken on it. What type of complaint?
Oh,
I'm sorry.
So this is intimate partner violence. And so the question is, will any of the disciplinary actions taken by the police department against officers who engage in it, will that be disseminated to the community pursuant to the repeal of 50A?
That information, yes, that would be disseminated. In the fact, if an officer is arrested, they're going to appear in the newspaper just like everyone else does. We don't pick and choose what goes to the media. Everybody who's arrested, the media has a right to that information. They're provided that information. As the police chief here, it doesn't matter to me if it's a cop or not. And they get treated just like everybody else. So whatever information we would release on anyone else's arrest, we would release on theirs. Just the only thing I would caution is that when the investigation is ongoing, regardless of who it is, the information cannot be released to the public until a case has been adjudicated.
Thank you, Chief.
I just want to remind everybody, the public who's out there, please put your questions into the chat format. I see a hand up, but we're following a format of field the questions to the chat, please. Thank you.
I think we may have answered this earlier about the PowerPoint presentation. Another question, another person asking if we could share that.
We can certainly share the little slides for sure. Not a problem. Just someone has to email us to let us know.
Yeah.
Sorry, everyone, just parsing through it as best I can here.
It's okay. Thank you for handling that.
There's a question here, question for the chief. Is the chief working with the state on some larger issues? It sounds like he would be a good person to guide his peers around EO 203.
The answer to that is yes. I am a zone representative to the Board of Governors for the New York State Chiefs Association. So I get to go to Albany quite frequently. I do get to meet with our Assembly and Senate people, and I also get to work with other police chiefs throughout New York State on a multitude of initiatives.
Thank you, Chief. There's a question, what about anti-racism training in addition to implicit bias training?
That training, yes, our police officers will be taking training. The most difficult thing we have, and I have to go back to when Lanny Walters was speaking, the most difficult thing we have in policing is that we've had like racial profile training, but there's the topics that we talk about today. And I checked with DCJS, Department of Criminal Justice Services, to make sure I didn't speak out of school. There was never really a curriculum design that specifically addressed bias in policing and racial diversity. So everybody's scrambling now to come together and put these curriculums together. And like anything else, it takes time to put the curriculums together because they have to be evidence-based. They have to ensure that what they're teaching the police is a methodology that we can employ and achieve positive results for our communities. But anybody who knows of specific training, we look at it all, and then it gets vetted. And if it's a training that's appropriate, and I think this committee is in a great position to be able to help evaluate and see what's appropriate for training for police officers here, then we welcome that.
Sorry, still parsing.
Yes, right.
Okay. Chief, another one for you. Do you agree with Mr. Puma that no matter what an officer is telling you to comply with, that you should just comply and then hope that corrective action is taken by the department?
Yes, because again, if a failure to comply, if you think you're right and the officer's wrong and you fail to comply, that escalates the situation. And that can turn into an encounter that eventually could become a lethal encounter. And I wouldn't want that. So what I would ask, and I've always asked of people, you don't have to agree with the police, but at least comply with what we're asking of you. There's so much recourse today, particularly civil recourse, that holds us accountable. Anybody can file a lawsuit if they feel they were wronged by the police. And we would encourage that. And I encourage people to come forward. If they have complaints against our agency, we investigate those complaints. And if you don't feel that we would investigate adequately, I'm not offended if you go to the district attorney's office, the attorney general's office, or to the town board to complain about something that you think is wrong. But the immediate situation, yes, everybody should comply.
I think that's such an important topic, and it's such a hot button issue, because I don't know who asked that question, but
Gilda, there's an entire discussion on the chat on this very topic. I just wanted to mention
and I would like to hear their voices on that. I mean, I think it's really, I think it's very important, because sometimes you see footage and yeah, it's hard to imagine. Well, I won't. I think we need some discussion on that. So
I have to say, I also want to clarify in terms of what I was talking about when I said one of the things we often hear of police saying, if only they complied. And my point was that with training about things like autism and post-traumatic stress disorder and things like that, police will realize that complying is not necessarily something that's possible. They have to have other skills. And I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but that certainly is my desire, including, by the way, I have to say that I was a psychologist in private practice specializing in post-traumatic stress disorder. And people of color, Black people in particular, who have either themselves experienced police brutality or who have witnessed it, have post-traumatic stress disorder. And some things that are perceived as not complying or a startle reaction, running, that actually with post-traumatic stress disorder, I'm speaking as the psychologist now, not a police officer, that actually in their mind is a survival skill. And that's why I think we have to really do something with training, because there are two different worlds out there, and we have to somehow figure out how both worlds can see each other and give a little. And I just want to say that, I understand that sometimes the officer wants someone to comply and they really can't. And I just hope that somehow that training can be included. And I'm sorry I butted in so emotionally, because that's really important to me.
No,
because of my experience with PTSD.
Right, and your compassion for that topic is well received and accepted by this administration. I understand that. I took the question as being, should people comply if they believe that the police officer is wrong? I may be incorrect in my interpretation of that particular question. If you understand that an officer is giving you an order, whether you believe it to be lawful or not, the best thing to do is comply. You also have the opportunity to say, can I have a supervisor? We have a sergeant on every shift, a supervisor. Can I speak to your supervisor? But the problem is we can't debate the issue, particularly when it comes to arresting somebody in the street. That's the court is where we debate whether the officer had probable cause and justification to make an arrest. And, we want to get people in here, process them, and send them on their way. We don't want to be labored by debating what may be or may not be the facts of a particular case. So that's, as much as we are trying to do a better job at working with our communities, we all have to do a better job at getting the community to understand how they interact with the police and what the expectations of the police are of the community. I think we've lost sight of that. And, I know our school resource officer, we have plans to discuss with the high school and the middle school about educating students, because, we have to start as they're coming out now as young adults. How do you interact with the police? What do you do when the police stop you? What's the appropriate way to act? And how should the police officer be acting? They should have an expectation of how we treat them. And if that's not happening, they have to understand they have the right to file a complaint or come speak to myself or the town board or the village mayor. So I get both sides of it, and that's why we're here today.
Is there someone from the public forum who wants to be heard on this issue? Because right now it's all the committee talking. And aside from what's going on in the chat stream, is there anybody who wants to come out and speak on it from experience or from?
I see Justine's hand raised. I think.
See, I can't see that. Okay.
Justine, would you unmute yourself?
Hello.
Hi.
So I just want to go back to the chief's comment about complying if you feel like an officer is wrong. Like, that is literally part of why I fear the police and why I fear for my son's interaction with the police, because in a lot of interactions with Black people, the police are wrong, like blatantly wrong. And even when we record it and when we call y'all and ask for a supervisor,
Justine, I don't mean to interrupt. Can you be specific to something from Saugerties? If there's something about a Saugerties interaction or Saugerties police.
Where my son got racially profiled in my backyard.
Okay, well, that's a perfect example.
Okay,
so
but if you would let me, I was not even done.
Go ahead. Sorry, Justine, go ahead.
So I had a mental health case and my son was racially profiled in my backyard, having nothing to do with that, just wanting to calm down and go outside and not have to see his stepfather be manhandled by the police. So my question is, when we comply and we are still profiled and we are still killed, because had I not been watching the cop that was walking up my driveway, like, what are you doing? It could have been my son, because somebody around the corner was being nosy and saw a Black kid in a white neighborhood's backyard. Like, it had nothing to do with anything. Like, somebody over there said something to a cop over. Do you understand how quick that could have escalated? And me trying to pay attention to one thing happening in my front could have got my son killed in my backyard.
Okay.
So complying doesn't help us all the time. It doesn't. To say, oh, we should comply when an officer's wrong. No. Like, y'all are not held accountable when we comply.
Thank you, Justine.
I just want to piggyback off of what Justine just said and the thoughts and the feelings of many, many people of color and most people of color who have experienced racial profiling, who fear for their sons and their daughters, who fear for their lives every single day walking out on the street. Compliance is great, and we want to comply with the law as a whole and as a community. We want to comply with police officers, but there is an accountability that needs to be addressed. And that is why this commission was formed. And it was a result of a dead man who was watched for almost 9 minutes be killed by 3 police officers with no capability of not complying because his hands were behind his back. That is the reality of what we are doing today. That sparked the potentiality for us to now address a system that has inherently been against people of color. That is the reality. Whether anybody wants to accept it or not, the facts are the facts. So we can say that there is not a factual basis to what I'm saying all day long, but there are statistics that back up what I am stating. The fact of the matter is there is racial issues in America, and that is all over the country. We're trying to address racial issues in Saugerties, and there have been racial issues and is racial bias amongst policing in Saugerties. It is. We can paint a broad brush of, you know, what has been televised, but we have to look at what the data is and really formulate a plan of action to get things done. And this is the weight of what our committee is formulated to do. I personally, I'm going to say this, I do not agree that people of color or anybody should just comply. That is my personal opinion. I'm not saying that on the rest of the committee because everybody has their own opinion on that, but I'm going to come out and say that because I know for a fact that there are other issues such as what Christine had said, that there's mental health issues, that there's PTSD, that there's other issues that come into being in my shoes, my son's shoes, my husband's shoes, my father's shoes. So I have that understanding. So with this committee, we really have to band together with the community and everybody's opinions and statements are, thank God it's in the chat box so that we can review it because that is going to be key in this. But there is evidence to prove and to back up and substantiate what is going on in not just this police department, but every police department. Now, in my opinion, and from what I've seen, from the small amount of evidence that I've seen, Saugerties Police is not as bad as many other police organizations in general, but there is work to do. There is much, 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 much room for improvement, and that is improving not just the police department, but the community itself, people themselves, because how is racism and how is sexism and how is all these issues placated down through from familial lineage? This is a disease process that has placated our American culture. This is not just the police system, and we're trying to address one little piece in policing in the entire judicial system that has been inherently racist. So I just wanted to say that, and that was partially my closing. Sorry, Gilda, but I couldn't.
That's okay. I'm glad you said it. It needed to be said, and I agree. Matthew Maloney has his hand up, then Deirdre, and I can't see any other. Then I see Lanny. Okay, let's start with Matthew.
Hi, thank you. And thank you for Tamika and Justine, your vulnerable statements. I appreciate that. I just want to say, you know, it's convenient for a police department to be able to talk specifically about what happened in my department, right? Because that's the only thing I can hold people accountable for. The problem is that when something does go wrong in a singular department, it's the Fraternal Order of Police and all of the resources and influence that they possess that comes to the rescue to make sure nothing happens to the police officers. So that's why if you're a police department and the Fraternal Order of Police is not after you or not upset with you, you're probably not doing the job that we want you doing as far as what we're talking about here, because it's not going to be popular on a national level to really start to address these issues in a way that will actually be transformative and not just placate so that we can just keep going about it and wait for the next disaster to happen. Because I'm sure there's a lot of police departments around the country that have now made national news that the day before that everybody thought everything was fine, or at least all the white people in that community thought everything was fine with their police department. So this is about really taking initiative and not just saying, oh no, we're better than the rest, you know. And that phrase that gets passed around so often, it's a few bad apples. Well, nobody completes that statement. It's a few bad apples that spoil the whole bunch. We have a culture of a problem within our police institutions that needs to be sought out and, you know, really not putting the blame on the citizens or not putting the responsibility all on the citizens, because we've been trying for generations now, especially Black and brown people and people of culture. So that's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthew. Deirdre Miller?
Okay. Can you see me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I want to say personally that a few years ago, I had an incident with Saugerties Police Department. One of my friends we were at a bar in Saugerties, the Pig. And one of my friends had like some kind of medical, like emergency type of thing. The ambulance were called, the ambulance and the police showed up. He started to be okay. He didn't want to go in the ambulance. He didn't want to have to pay the ambulance bill. And so, you know, and so I know no rights because I have a child who has a seizure disorder and he has an ambulance called all the time. So I know what the rights are. And so I told him, you don't have to go with the ambulance if you don't want to. You can refuse. And the police, and I said, because I can drive you if you need to go. And the police officer started getting nasty with me, threatening me, and put his hand on his gun. And I was just like, I couldn't even believe it. I was just like, are you kidding me? Because he was mad because I wouldn't let my friend go in the ambulance. And he thought I was interfering, which I was with him. We were there hanging out together. I had a right to say something.
Thank you, Deirdre.
But that's not it. But the other thing, the point that I want to is real quick, is the fact that, you know, this is mostly an American thing. This is mostly an American thing. I lived in a city in Eastern Europe, in Slovakia, where I was literally the only Black woman there. And I never was accosted by the police. I never had an issue. There was one issue with one young black male from France. He was their student, and he got attacked by a group of people. And let me tell you something, that within hours, they had that person arrested. They had him, and he was, within a week, he was already sentenced and put in jail for 3 years. We don't have that kind of thing here. It's always a big fight, and it becomes about who did what to who, and it's somehow or another the Black person is always, you know, villainized as, and their you know, whatever bad thing they've done in their history has blasted as if, you know, that gave, you know, the person, the perpetrator, whether it be a civilian citizen or it be a cop, that gives them some kind of, reasoning or right to do whatever it was that they did to the Black person. And this is getting to be a little ridiculous. And I'm really kind of sick of it. But this is the kind of attitude that we have in America. And we need to readdress the way that we think. That's why I've said before, this is cultural conditioning. It is part of our culture. And we have to change the culture in America.
Deirdre, that's exactly what we're trying to do with our recommendations. If you have additional recommendations, send it to us via email, via our phone, via the Facebook page. Get in touch with us if there are things that we're recommending here that are not enough. And I know what you're saying about the cultural change. Is there, we are actually at time.
I just want to address that, though. I just want to say, Deirdre, you're absolutely correct. But with this committee, unfortunately, we can't, we can't change racism. I mean, that, we only have one little piece, but you're absolutely correct. And it is systemic, and it's the country. And we're going to try and do our little piece here to hopefully make it more fair and just. But it's not in my lifetime, not in your lifetime. We're not going to see the change. I'm not optimistic.
Yeah, I'm not either.
Really.
Gilda, if I may,
I'm sorry, Joe, then Lanny. Joe, then Lanny.
The reason I want to jump in, I apologize, Lanny, is, I was the person that said it, okay? And let me put it in proper perspective. I first talked about de-escalating. That's the route we should be going. The last thing I want in my town of Saugerties, that we've all been, the committee members today that are speaking, you've had a chance for the last 2 months to tell us what you think. We have looked at everything, and it looks pretty damn good in Saugerties. It really does. I don't want to hear that we have a long way to go. We have a way to go, but not a long way. I do not want to see one person of color or any color get shot or assaulted in my community. So if it takes somebody complying and they're on a body cam that's going to show whether it was a legal order or not, that is much better than tomorrow's Daily Freeman saying somebody was shot, somebody was killed, somebody was hurt. That's the last thing I want in my community. And I hope that's the last thing any of us want. I don't apologize for saying it because this is good dialogue. I'm glad we had this opened up. It's important to talk about it, but that's the proper perspective that I wanted it in. Thank
Lanny?
you.
Thank you, Joe. Lanny? Lanny, you're on mute. You're unmute. Lanny?
Yes, the officer who approached Deidre probably had a certain level of unconscious bias. And he was reading that situation in a way that caused him to treat her the way he treated her. And hopefully the training that we are recommending will make it different. Will get him to understand that he doesn't need to see Deidre or any person of color in the way he or she was seeing them that night in that bar. And I don't know if we can cure this cultural problem in that way. Probably not entirely, but the police are given an awful lot of authority, and we need to do something to cure that situation. Thank you.
We're actually over our 2-hour time. I don't know if this is a conversation we want to continue now or obviously wait for our next meeting.
I also think that I really extend an invitation to people who want to give us direct, for lack of a better word, testimony. I mean, I'd like to hear people. And so I'm personally giving an invitation that if you need to have specifics that you would like us to hear, we want to hear it. We want to hear it.
Absolutely. We can set up another, Michael, I can't see your whole name there. Villarella.
Valarella, it's a long one.
Valarella. Go ahead.
Yes, I wrote a few things in some of the comments. I think some of the people got a little inflamed by some of my statements. I'm just a public attendee here on this committee. And I think while what the committee is doing to gather the data, to review everything, is a positive thing. And certainly there are many different points of view and perspectives that people can take on this. And what I was mentioning in my chats, which I just wanted to bring forward here, was talking about examples, okay? Now my example may be discounted, being a white male, and my example may be just discounted, but it shouldn't be, because I am also a member of the community. I have encountered the police over the last 30 years here in Saugerties for a variety of different things, whether they be traffic stops or some prowler around my house or whatever the situation may be. That this department of the people that we call first, there is a problem. Them first. And while the training, I think, is a good idea, and that we need to be looking at the preparedness of the officer to answer that call, I think we do have to keep an open mind to the other side of the perspective that says not all officers or not all things are that it's always a frightening situation. You got an officer being called into the pig with a medical emergency going on. Now, and I'm not belittling the woman who had mentioned that, so please, by all means, I'm not looking to discuss her specific experience with people with seizures and so on. But the officer is now in a drinking establishment. There is been a call. There's an ambulance called. His position, I would believe, is to say, I've got to get control of the situation to find out the facts and what's going on. So, ma'am, please step aside. And I don't mean that ma'am specifically. I'm using it as a general explanation. So I think while we look at all of these things that we have to review about the department, I think we also need to comply now. I don't feel under any, of course, I'm going to be discounted, I know it, but I don't feel that there is anywhere in Saugerties where I feel that by complying with the police that I will not get my day in court. Okay, so now maybe there are others that feel different. So again, I'm expressing only my opinion. And I've been on the side where I've asked the police for their help, and they've been unbelievably helpful and unbelievably professional. I've also been on the side of the police where they're telling me, hey, wise guy, straighten up, when I was younger and doing stupid things, perhaps. So in all of those things, I never thought that there was an issue of impropriety here in the Saugerties Police. And while we may have larger issues on a national basis that need to be addressed and need to be looked at, all I ask for at this meeting, so what's my point of this, that we keep perspective, that I believe we have a good police department and someone needs to keep law and order in a situation and in a community as a whole. And I think they do a good job of it. All that said, I think the work of this community is good. And I think it's really good that our police chief, I guess, is on the committee, if I understand. This is the first time I was invited to this, so I appreciate the invitation, whoever sent it to me, because I think it's great. And I think it's good that we should be discussing these things in unity. But I also want to point out that the
I want to say
undertone,
thank you.
I believe, as
I want to say thank you, but there are two other people have their hands raised and we're already over.
Yeah.
So I heard you but anyway, thank you for the positive feedback and I think we should move on.
Yes, let's go to Annette and then Sakina, and then we're going to go to Tamika to give the wrap up, and then I'll give the final goodbye with our next date. Annette, then Sakina.
Thank you. I just wanted to say something. I just briefly want to say that we are all aware that there's systemic racism. It's been ongoing, centuries, generational. We are here as a sign, so to speak, that people are being heard finally. And I'm sorry that it took this long. I'm sorry that it took the deaths of multiple people of all color, brown, different shades of brown. But I am so glad that we're having this dialogue now. We are here to initiate this dialogue, to make a report, to make recommendations. But this racism that we're talking about is systemic and it permeates all aspects of government, all aspects of society. And we can only begin at a certain point. And while every issue cannot be addressed tonight, we are here to say that we're being heard. I have communicated with the police. I have listened to this community. I have personally told my children, when you are stopped by the police, the first thing you should do is not escalate the situation by resisting. That's me personally as a mother of an African-American child. You cannot help the situation by resisting a police directive. And sometimes it starts in the home. We have, like, part of this committee, part of the recommendations will be to foster youth-police interaction and see how we can start with the next generation. And if we can assist in the home, we will be recommending all these things, how to get our youth to begin to view the police not as the enemy, but as someone who is there to assist. And so it's going to take a shift, a mind shift, generational. And sometimes we have to assist, even though we have deep-rooted antagonism, deep-rooted emotion, and deep-rooted feelings of hurt, and we have been discriminated against. That is apparent, that is evident. But for the sake of the next generation, I am willing to come to the table so at least my grandchildren will have a chance to live in this country. So I am here as a peacemaker. I am here to encourage dialogue. We have said the town halls will continue, not just in Saugerties. This is going to be, hopefully be a national change, a global change. We are all here to live side by side, and this is the beginning. So that's all I wanted to say. Let it be a positive thing. This committee is a positive thing. We are airing our differences and our hurts, and I'm glad we're at least talking and not, ignoring the elephant in the room. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. Thank you. very
Annette, you
much.
took my
Sakina?
closing. I don't close anymore. That was my
Oh, there's your close. There's the
No,
close.
No, we have to hear Sakina.
Sakina?
Sakina.
Are you muted?
No, I'm not.
There you
I just had a quick question. I wanted to know if every police stop in Saugerties is documented.
Chief, I'll let you answer that.
Yes, every time we stop a vehicle or we encounter a person on the street and we engage dialogue with them, it is recorded at police headquarters in the form of a blotter entry. And the information is in that entry as to the reason for the stop and the outcome of the stop.
So I can go find out about a stop. Like you could pull up data on a specific name on a stop.
Correct.
And okay. I just wanted to check because we're talking about collecting data and I want to make sure that it's complete.
Right. And then also the officers by department policy are supposed to engage their body worn camera. So it's another form of documentation of our encounter with an individual. We, for the purpose of making sure documentation was done, when we stop an individual for vehicle and traffic, we have an option of either writing a regular traffic ticket or a warning summons. But when the motorist leaves, they leave with a piece of paper in their hand. And that's done intentionally so that we document the fact that we stopped the person and what we stopped them for. So if I give you a written warning because I said you were speeding, you can come to headquarters and say, I don't think I was speeding. And we're going to look at that. And the officer's we're going to bring that document up and say, no, you were stopped at this such and such a time on this date. And this is what the infraction was. We don't.
So no stops are done when there's not an infraction. No stops are done by just for checking.
No, we can't do that. We have to have probable cause or reasonable suspicion to believe that something has occurred. And you may, and again, without knowing your particular situation.
No, I'm going to follow up with this. I want to see if the traffic stop, well, it wasn't traffic. I didn't walk away. I didn't have a piece of paper. I wasn't given anything, but I was stopped at night. And that's the reason why I want to know, because we're saying that the data that we have does not bear out certain information. And we're saying that we want more data. So I want to see that the data is actually being collected every time that there's an interaction, because if that, there's a reason why public perception happens and the data doesn't bear it out. So I would just like to find out if the stop that occurred with me was documented.
Right. And just additionally, just so you know, if for some reason that was disputed and an officer said, I didn't stop you at that location, all of our
I don't have a name. I wasn't given a name.
No, I'm saying all of our vehicles are GPS tracked. So we have a number of different ways that we can verify, where an officer stopped someone, how long they were out with that person for. And they have to, again, by policy, it's a policy. Can people not abide by policy? Yes. And then they get written up for policy infraction. But they're supposed to call out with the traffic stop. And they also are supposed to enter that into a mobile data terminal, which connects directly to our records management system.
No, I just want to know, and I will follow up to confirm that the data for a stop where nothing occurred, there was no accusation, there was no infraction. I just want to see that the data for that experience was collected, because if no data for that exists, then
there's a problem.
Chasing after data, gets a little sketchy. So
Right.
I'll follow up.
Yeah, you can get a hold of it. I'm here all day tomorrow and then Friday.
Cool.
Exactly. Okay. And that is such an important point, because that's the kind of data that we don't have on the site. It's not public knowledge. But it's also, we want more information on each and every stop, and we want it analyzed appropriately. How many are, so that's a perfect, I mean, it's such a great question, and it's so important. And these are the changes we need to start making soon. So we have this information and we analyze it to make sure we're doing it right. They're doing it right.
Who is
We're
it?
all
Take
doing
it
it
away.
right.
Take it away, Tamika.
Okay, everybody's doing it right.
Take it away, Tamika.
Tamika.
All right. This has been a momentous task that we've all been charged as a team to review and make recommendations on. It's only with the support and the voices of our community members that we can effectively address any of these issues that have been arising for decades. We appreciate each of you for attending our town halls, for responding to our surveys, writing on our board, and your voices are heard. Collectively, we can improve our dynamic in our community, helping not only relationships with the police department, but hopefully the relationship between community members overall. Racism is real, and this is why all of us are here tonight. The key factors in our legal system as a whole that need to be addressed is the effect of this commission as a small step into the right direction. As a nurse, I know firsthand that a disease cannot be effectively treated without diagnosis and realization of that disease itself. And unfortunately, up until recent history, to extent even now, the issues plaguing this community and the community of color have gone unheard. So much of our task has been to research and recommend stronger tracking methods so that it can increase the accountability and the ability to address these core issues. We are now able to work together as a community to make real sustainable change. And we are optimistic that the ripple effect and our recommendations could create this change in not just the town of Saugerties, but beyond these walls. And it's only done through the continued diligence and actions by our government officials and our community to hold each of these officials accountable. Thank you again for everyone for your feedback, your time, and your voices. Again, they are heard, they are taken into deep consideration, and hopefully much of it can be used in implementing as we prepare our proposal to go to the next step.
Thank you, Tamika. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. We hope to see you again at the third public town hall, and that will be on February 17th. It's on a Wednesday night, but please get in touch with us. Between now and then, we're working on our final report. We still want to hear from you until our final report goes in. Thank you so much for your time. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.